back to the Let's Make Food from Food Kitchen. Today we are making sourdough bread. Now, the one thing I want to say, patience, 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 lots of patience. Sourdough bread takes a long time to make, but don't be intimidated by that. You can break it up to make it work throughout your day. So, the first thing you do, the day before, maybe the night before if you're making it in the morning, feed your starter. You want to get that starter nice and active. Your starter needs to come all the way up as far as it'll go. You'll notice it starts to fall and there will still be a little dome on top of it. Sourdough's perfect, ready to go with that starter. So I always feed it the night before. Last night I fed it about 9:30 p.m., something like that. So it had plenty of time to rise. It started to fall. So it's ready to go. Sourdough bread's been around for a long time. It's also one of the most nutritious breads you can eat. Sourdough bread is easy on the digestive system when you compare it to other breads. We're not adding commercially produced yeasts. We've got our own wild yeast right here in our sourdough starter that we've made. One of the things I'm not going to do is get super complicated in this one. Today is specifically for the beginner sourdough maker. You've never made sourdough before. Why would I do that? Well, I am at about a year mark of making sourdough bread. My first loaf was a hockey puck, and I am not kidding in that. It was hard. I couldn't break it open. I made so many mistakes, I had no idea. And I watched video after video, and I was so frustrated. So what I've decided to do was make this process for the beginner. I'm going to take away some of the intimidation. One of those things that people run into when they first start making sourdough bread is how high the moisture content is. It's very sticky and it's wet, and we're not used to that when we make bread. We're used to something smooth and supple, and that's just not what sourdough bread is. However, you can still make a sourdough that isn't so sticky in the beginning. As you learn how to make your breads, you can make it more and more moist with your moisture content. You want to get, I think, about 80% moisture. 800 grams of flour, 460 grams of water, 10 grams of salt, 320 grams of starter. So what I have here is a mixture of flours. I've got 100 grams of whole wheat flour and 700 grams of white unbleached flour. You can use rye flour, you can use any kind of flour you want that is unbleached. We've talked about this with the starter. It translates over into your bread. If you want to use half and half of the whole wheat and the white, do what you want, it's your bread. So the first thing we need to do is mix our flours. And we want to mix our flours ahead of time and give them a chance to do what's called autolyse. What that means is we're just letting the flour and the water mix together, and all the flour will absorb that water appropriately. Now, here's another thing I'm going to do. I'm using a mixer. Not everybody has one, and that's okay. You can do it with a spatula, you can do it by hand, whatever you want to do to get this done. There's no wrong way to mix your flour with your water, I promise. All I want to do is get the water and the flour mixed at this point. We're not kneading it. We haven't added our sourdough starter yet. So I'm going to let this mix. All right. So as you can see, it's very still soft at this point. It's not moist yet because we haven't put in our starter. So what we want to do is we want to let this sit for about 20 minutes. And the reason we do that is because we want it to have plenty of time for that flour to get together with that water. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a towel and just cover it up. We don't want to dry it out by leaving it uncovered. So that's going to stay covered. In the meantime, I'm going to wash my hands. What I'm going to do while this sits, I'm going to show you what our sourdough starter should look like. It is bubbly. It is fragrant, and it's sticky. If you can see that, you can see it pull and all the bubbles in there. I'm trying to do it so you can see it. Maybe I'll get a close-up while we're waiting. All right, I've let it rest for about 30 minutes. I did some dishes. I put away some other stuff. I cleaned my table. You get the idea. I did some busy work, so I leave it alone. The next thing we need to do is add the remainder of our ingredients, which is our salt and our sourdough starter. So I got my bowl on the scale here and I zeroed it out. You just press tare if you need a reminder. I'm going to take off my lid. We need 320 grams of starter. Let me grab a spoon actually. There we go. So I'm just going to take it out. And I don't know if you can see the bubbles in there kind of as I take it out. They're beautiful. And this can take a minute just because it's so sticky, which is great. That's what we want. Alright, I got too much, so I'm going to take some off the top and just put it back. This is not the first time that's happened to me, by the way. This happens a lot. The mess I'm making of my jar. This is a good indication to you that I am not a professional. Okay, there we go. So, what I want to do is clean up my jar just a tiny bit. There we go. I'll use a new paper towel. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to add in my salt. And then we want to mix it together. And I'm going to start with my spoon a little bit. And get rid of the scale will be helpful. Don't need that anymore. So, we're just going to start putting it in there. And you can use your hands if you wash them. And since I did the dishes, my hands are clean. There we go. And you can just start, I'm just pulling it and folding it. Pulling it up and folding it over. This is basically kneading. But I want to get that starter mixed in with that flour water. And it takes a little bit of strength. So what I do is I pull it up and I fold it over and push it down. Now you got to be careful though not to get rid of all those tiny little bubbles that you've created. We want to keep our sourdough as friendly as possible. So now I'm just kind of doing this motion with it. I want it to get well mixed in with my starter. There we go. Now, this is where I'm at with it. You can see, you can hear it actually. Can you hear it? It's very wet. And again, don't be intimidated by that. It's supposed to be my first instinct when I first made this. Because I didn't watch any videos, I just read, was to grab flour and just put more flour in there because that's not what I was used to. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? This isn't right. So it is right to be moist and sound sticky. That's what you want. So don't be worried about that. All right. So I'm going to try and pick this up. This is what my dough looks like. It's what your dough should look like, basically. My hand's going to be wet, sticky, and that's okay. You can do this in your stand mixer if you want. I decided not to. I tend to over mix it when I do it in my stand mixer. I'll turn it on, I'll walk away, I'll come back, like 10 minutes later. It's a little too long. So I'm just going to be done with that. The next thing we want to do is leave this alone for about an hour. So set a timer. You're going to let this rest. Cover it with a towel, cover it with plastic wrap, cover it with something. We want our moisture to stay in here and not go out into the air. So I'm going to wash my hands and then we're going to feed our starter. Okay, hands are clean. So what I have here is like a tea towel, and I am just going to put it on top, and I'm going to set this over here for now. The next step that you need to do is refeed your starter. You've just taken a bunch of that out, it's risen, it's fallen, it needs to be fed, it's hungry. So I've got 50 grams of water and 50 grams of my whole wheat flour. And you just stir it up like you normally do. Actually, I'm not going to use that. I have the bread stuff in it and there was salt, so so I'm just going to use my spatula because I can wash it again. All right. Has anybody been voting on a name for our starter? I kind of like bubbles. But you tell me what you think. Go back to the starter episode. There's a couple of options, or you can suggest something. Let me know. I think pretty soon we'll take those votes and add them up and see what we come up with. All right, our starter is fed. I'm going to get a new paper towel and cover it up and put it away for another day. Now, if this is your first loaf and you don't think you're going to make any more for a while, let it sit for an hour or so. Then take a regular solid lid, put it on top, and stick it in the fridge for a week. Make sure you feed it every week. I set a reminder on my calendar so that I remember to feed Tristan downstairs in my kitchen. But you can do that. If you want to go ahead and start making loaf after loaf, then just keep it out on the counter and feed it every day. The recipe that we're making today is for 2 loaves of bread. And the nice thing about that is you can bake one day and bake one the next day, or you can bake them both and put one in the freezer. Sourdough does freeze really well. It's been about an hour and we are ready for the next step. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this into a glass bowl so you can see how I'm doing this. One of the tricks that I've learned is that because this gets so sticky, you can dip your hand in a little water and it won't stick as bad, see, if you get your hand wet first. You don't have to do that if you don't mind the sticky. I really don't either, so much mind, but there it is. You can also use flour, but I caution against that because you are going to add flour back into your supposedly moist dough. So I prefer water. I'm just going to pull it and tuck. Pull it and tuck. I'm going to keep twisting the bowl. This is called folding it or fluffing it. Some people refer to it as the envelope fold because you're just pulling it and folding it over, pulling it and folding it over. And you're just going to do this for a couple of minutes. You don't want to push it down and start destroying those bubbles that we've been working so hard to make. And you can see that as you do this, you'll see that the texture of your bread will start to change, which is what we want. We want to see that skin kind of change as we go. So you're going to do this, like I said, for a couple of minutes, then you're going to cover it back up. After you've done that, you're going to let it sit for another hour. I think that's probably good. All right, and do it one more time. There we go. That makes me happy. Okay, and as you do this, you'll start to get the feel of what this should be. Trial and error is going to be your friend in this case, so don't be afraid to mess it up. Don't be afraid to play with it. Just remember, you want it to be moist. You want it to be wet. So that said, I'm gonna let you go do something for an hour and come back, and I'll see you then. Another hour has passed and we are ready to move on with our next step. I'm just going to take this and set it aside, but don't get rid of it because you'll still need it. It is time to split our dough in half. So what we want to do is, on a clean surface, you are going to dust it well with flour. If there's not enough flour, it will stick. Remember, this is a very sticky, wet dough. So everything you do needs to be well dusted with flour. The other thing you're going to want to have handy, if at all possible, is a bench knife. This is the bench knife, okay? It's not super sharp, but it will scrape your dough as you go along if it does happen to stick. So I'm going to wet my fingers a little bit in this water, and I'm just going to peel my dough out of my bowl. One of the things I've noticed is I can see that it had some nice bubbles there that have developed as part of the fermentation process. I'm going to get rid of that for a second. So this step is really simple. All you're going to do is you're going to look down at your dough and you're going to try and get about half, as close to half as you can get, and you're going to slice it that way so that it creates now 2 separate loaves. This one looks a little smaller than this. It's not a big deal, not the end of the world. So what I want to do now is let this cut heal. So I'm going to put my bowls on the top of it. You can use a tea towel. If it's been dusty, you can dust some flour on the top of it so it doesn't stick. You're gonna let this sit for 20 minutes while those heal. See you in a few. Our 20 minutes has passed and we're ready to move on. I am going to move one of these out of my way. So I'm just gonna take my bench knife and lift and just set it over here. And then cover it back up. We want to keep those covered until we're ready to use it. I'm also going to re-spread my flour back over. And before I actually start messing with it, I am going to take this opportunity to talk about how you're going to store it for the next step. You're going to let it rise for about 3 hours minimum. The other thing you can do is cover it with plastic wrap and put it in the fridge overnight and then bake it the next morning. Regardless of what you do, you need to have something for it to rise in, and it cannot be glass. It can't be a smooth surface. And the reason that is your bread's trying to rise and climb up. And if it's glass, it's smooth, it can't grab onto it and keep on climbing. So there's a couple of options. This is a proving basket. I think they call it a Benetton. It's got a removable cloth on there that you can take off and wash. So I'm going to use one of those for my 2 loaves. The other option, you could take one of these glass bowls and put a fine mesh tea towel inside, and again you're going to cover that with flour. It can grab onto that and climb up. I caution you, whichever one you do, you must use enough flour for it to not stick. You want it to grab and climb but not stick. I've had it stick. Sometimes you can peel it off successfully without tearing your dough open, and sometimes you can't. So that's the caution I'm going to give you there. So what I want to do before I start messing with that is I'm going to take off my bowl because I'm going to let it prove in this one overnight. And I'm going to take my tea towel, I'm going to set it inside. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my flour that I have here and I'm going to generously shake it in there. Tap it in there, however you got to get it. You want it to be well coated with flour so that you don't have a problem with it sticking later. See? There we go. I think that's probably good. So there is my basket and here is my bowl. And while we're at it, I'm going to talk about the shapes of your bread. Round is kind of traditional standard sourdough bread. I started doing it in bread pans. That's how I began. And I still make it that way sometimes because it slices up nicely for sandwiches and things if that's what you're making. So I'm going to do one of each so that you can kind of see how it goes and what you want to do, and also so that you just understand that it is an option to do a regular shaped bread loaf or a round bread loaf. If you have a square pan, use a square pan. I don't know. Okay, so it's time to play with some dough. So what I want to do is I want to get this shaped into my dough ball. Okay, and I've seen this done multiple ways. I'm going to show you 2 different ways. The first way is pulling it towards you. I'm not letting the whole thing slide. I'm actually letting the table grasp the dough and I'm pulling it towards me. And what I'm trying to accomplish is getting a skin that is somewhat tight on this. And if your dough is sticking to your table, you can use your bench knife to pick it up and turn it. But this seems to be working out well for me. So this is starting to develop a skin. It's tighter, but I can see my bubbles. What I don't want to do is pull it so tight that it rips. Okay, your bubbles will start to tear. I don't know if you can see it. There's a little bubble right there. So I want to avoid breaking those open. We worked so hard and waited so many hours for those to grow. So I'm going to take it and just roll it around a little bit very gently in some of that flour. I know I've already floured my basket, but trust me, lots of flour. Okay, I'm going to gently set it in my bowl. Okay, that one's ready to go. Then I'm going to do the next one. And this one, I'm going to do it in my traditional bread shape in the Benetton basket. Okay, same thing. No, not the same thing. I said I do it two ways. So we're going to kind of tuck it, and you want to avoid getting a lot of flour in there because you're going to ruin that moisture content that you've developed. So you just want to, it's kind of like folding paper a bunch of times. Just pull it a little bit and tuck it in. Pull it a little bit and tuck it in. Okay? And again, you're trying to develop that skin. And I can see I'm almost tore it open, so I'm going to stop right there. Now, it just so happens that this turned out to be somewhat of a rectangular shape, like our bread basket. So I am going to put it in upside down, in there, like so. It's already been floured. I am going to just gently dust around the sides because as this grows overnight, it's going to expand. We want to do the same thing with the round one. And one thing I failed to do here, and shame on me, I'm going to fix it and show you. You should put this in upside down. So I'm going to fix that mistake. And then I'm going to reflour a little around the sides. So why would we do that? Why would we put it in upside down? Because when it's done, we're going to put our pan over it and flip it. Okay? So if we put it in upside down to prove, then we don't have to try and deal with flipping it over later. So I'm just going to dust a little more on the top of this one so that whatever cover I put on there, if I put plastic grip on there, it won't stick as it rises. I don't think you need to see me wrap it in plastic, but I'm going to put it in the fridge and I'll see you tomorrow. Here we are. It has been 18 hours since we put our sourdough in the fridge. So I took it out a couple of hours ago to let it warm up, come to room temperature. You want to do that before you stick it in the oven. So a couple of things you could do. Take it out of the fridge, set it on your counter, preferably on a towel. I had it on a towel. My counters and my table are very cold, so I have that towel in there to just kind of buffer that a little. After you've done that, go ahead and turn on your oven. 450 degrees is kind of the minimum. 500 is better. It just depends on what your cookware will tolerate. This is 450 degrees toleration. I know some of the ceramic ware, this is cast iron, some of the ceramic limits it to 400s, as does some of the glass. So check your manufacturer's recommendations on what the temperature limit is. You don't want something cracking and then getting shards in your bread and have to throw it away after all that work. So I've got mine set to 450 up here. I'm gonna have to make this in two different ovens, and I'll tell you why here in just a sec. Before I do, I wanted to mention I got up after I took this out and set my oven. I fed my sourdough, and there's a couple of nice little bubbles on there. So I'm gonna give it maybe another half hour. Then I'm gonna put this lid on it, the solid lid, and stick it in the fridge. Then I can wait an entire week before I feed it again. So that's how that's gonna work. Back to the bread. So I have my two different loaves, and I have two different style pans, and I have this oven. I've done quite a bit of trial and error frustrations with this oven. It's great for some things. It's not so great for sourdough bread because it has this little gap. You need to keep your moisture inside your oven. So there's no way to really safely seal that I'm aware of. I contacted the manufacturer. They said, check your recipe. Well, it's not the recipe, it's the oven. So what I'm gonna do in this oven, I'm gonna cook my round loaf in this Dutch oven. It's something that resembles a Dutch oven anyway, because I can keep the lid on top of it. Because the other issue I had with baking bread is once it rises up, it gets kind of close to those top burners, and then it was burning the top of my bread while it still wasn't finished cooking. So I'm gonna solve those issues because we can do that with this pan up here. In my kitchen downstairs, I have just your regular oven, and I'm gonna cook it in an uncovered pan. So the way to do that is same temperatures or higher. This one I can do at 500. So what I need to do though, because it's not covered, to use its own moisture to steam it. I'm going to take a pan similar to this, not glass, don't use glass, and I'm going to pour, once I put this in there, I'm going to immediately pour some boiling water into this pan, maybe a cup or two, and that will keep steam going as your bread bakes. And we really need that to allow the skin to stay pliable enough to rise up. If you don't do that, your crust will harden too soon, and then your bread will be more dense and it won't allow some of those bubbles to expand. So it's an important step if you're baking it without a cover. Now that we've talked about that, let's prep our bread. I've got a couple of tools here. Those are knives for scoring. But before we do that, I need to get some flour, so give me just 1 second. All right, I've got my flour. I'm going to go ahead and open these up and let you see them. I'm going to give you a close-up. Aren't they beautiful? They've risen at least double the size of what they originally were, which is perfect. So what we need to do is dust our pans just a little bit with some flour so it doesn't stick. That was probably a little too much in that corner. So I'm just gonna kind of wipe it around. It's not gonna stick very much to it, but what we wanna do is just get a light coating on there. Even though there's some on our bread, it would be kind of sad to do all this work and then have your bread stick to the pan when it's finished so you can't get it out, which has happened to me. I did eventually get it out, but it came out in pieces, which made me sad. All right, so I'm gonna just dump out the little bit of extra, but you can see there's a light coating of flour in there. This one, it's not gonna stick to really at all because it is enameled cast iron, but I'm still gonna put a little in the bottom because that'll be the place where I can't get to remove it. I can't scrape the bottom to get it out if it does in fact stick. So I am just gonna spread that a little tiny bit as best I can. Next, we need to flip our loaves. You remember in the last segment I said we prove them upside down so that when we're ready, we can flip it. So one quick motion, that's a nice sound, and it came right off. I am gonna adjust it a little bit so that it's a little more even in here. But if you look, you can see the marks from the Benton basket. That one's done with that step, so we're gonna do the same thing here. It's gonna be a little more difficult because this is cast iron and heavy, and this bowl is glass and heavy, so there we go. Take the bowl off. Let me get rid of this too, we don't need that. And then we're gonna gently pull this off. Beautiful, let me show you this. I apologize, I had to run downstairs. I had some screaming children. My husband got called to work last minute, but this still had to happen. So I came back up and I did this great presentation on scoring our bread, and then I went to turn it off and then I forgot to record it. So you didn't get to see me do the scoring, but I'm still gonna talk about it again. This right here is a scoring tool. This is just a regular razor blade. This was, I don't know, $12, $13, $14. This was a pack of 100 for just under $10. So economically speaking, this is your better tool. This one is thinner, so you're gonna get a little more control on your clean cuts. But one of the things I don't like about this one is that it has these ridges, and I constantly catch my bread when I'm using this one. And the blades are more expensive for it too. But I mean, it's nice if you're doing all the little tiny intricate details, which I have not become skilled yet at doing to make it beautiful. I try. So I prefer this one. And what you do in one quick movement, you're gonna take your blade and you're gonna drag it across. And you can see how deep it went. That's what you want. Then you can take your knife and make light little marks to get your little designs in there to make it however pretty you want to. Much respect to those artisans who make it look so beautiful. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying, I'm learning. Scoring is very important. If you miss this step, you're going to have a blowout. I mean an actual blowout. The skin of your bread, just the same reason that we need the moisture, it will harden at some point, but your bread's gonna wanna continue to expand. So what you have to do is score it so that it has places to grow. If you miss that step, like I said, it will explode. It'll explode at whatever the weakest point in your dough skin is, and who knows what that's gonna be. So, score your bread. We're gonna put this one into the oven before I realized I hadn't pressed record. Again, my apologies. So this one's in for 35 minutes. It's got the lid, so I don't need to do the water step. I'm gonna run this downstairs. I'm gonna put it in the oven. I'm gonna take about a cup or more of boiling water and put that in the oven along with it, and that'll get the steam continuing to help our rise. So once these have baked, I'll take them out. I'm gonna clean up my table and make it look like it's clean, and we'll see you with some baked bread. Sourdough is out of the oven and it is looking beautiful. I'm gonna go ahead and take them out of the pans after they've rested for a couple of minutes. So, since it's already rested for a couple of minutes, let's get that done. I'm gonna take my gloved hands. These pans are so hot, and it should perfectly pop out just like that. And there we go. One more to go. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. This one's stuck a little bit. Let's see if I can get it. Not with my glove. Hold on one second. And this happens. It's okay. We're just going to carefully try and get it out without breaking our crust. Ooh, it's the bottom. There we go. Got it. Now let's check and make sure we didn't do any damage. Oh, there's a little tiny piece left in there. I don't think it's the end of the world. I mean, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world either. So, as you can see, those things do happen, and they happen to somebody who's been making this for a year now. So, practice, practice, patience. I'm gonna keep saying it about sourdough bread. You've gotta be patient and work on your practice. These are beautiful. I am so happy with how they turned out. I even got a little pretty design on there. Do you see this? Oh, I don't wanna touch it, it's so hot. Naturally leavened bread is so much better for your body. Now, if you don't want to take the time to make it, I completely understand. Once again, the show is not about telling you how you have to do something or why you have to do it. We're here to provide the information and help you along the journey. If you want to have this delicious bread and don't want to make it yourself, go buy it. Couple of tips if you are going to go buy it, especially if you're going to a grocery store. Ask them if it's real sourdough, made from sourdough starter. And the reason I say that is some stores use a pre-done yeast, or they'll add yeast to it to get that rise going. So it's not truly naturally leavened if they do those things. So just go ask them if it's naturally leavened, if they've used any added yeast. If the answer is no, then you are good to go. Go ahead and buy it. Local bakeries tend to be your best bet to find an actual sourdough that's naturally leavened like these. So I'm gonna let these cool off before we slice them open. I know you're probably excited to see what the inside looks like, but if you slice them open before they are completely cooled on the inside, what's gonna happen is as you slice it down, it's gonna squish down the crumb, which is not what you want. You wanna keep everything intact, and it'll be a lot stronger if it's cooled. So that's probably a good 3 to 4 hours if you let it sit out on the counter. For storage on this bread, you want to store it in a paper bag until you slice it open. Once you slice it open, I put it in a Ziploc bag, or I wrap it in plastic wrap, something to keep it from going stale. This crust will stay nice and crunchy and chewy is how it should be for a couple of 3-4 days. Finally, it's time to slice it open. I've let it cool for almost 3 hours. I'm just gonna slice it in half and show you what we got. Here we go. Moment of truth. Oh, it's perfectly done. There we go. Oh, it's beautiful. So happy with this. If you like this episode, please click the like button. If you enjoy this sort of content and haven't already subscribed, please do consider subscribing to our channel. Recipe and directions are down in the description below. As always, from our kitchen to yours, let's make food from food.